Yeah, sorry. Do we get to hear the music too, or is it just for them?
Oh, dang. Well, apparently it's just for them because I didn't wire it right, but they got it.
We got it. Are we ready?
We are ready.
Are we on?
We are on.
Are we on?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Black Hills Information Security, talking about news. I am joined by Ralph and Rob and Ryan.
So you're the only non-R.
The only non-R. So if you would like to work for Black Hills Information Security and your name begins with an R, that moves your resume right up the top of that stack. So right up there, top shelf. Rob or Rambo or Raleigh, we're looking for you. So everybody, we only got 2 stories for today, but I think that they're kind of important stories. The first story, Ryan, did you get the stories? Since I sent them literally like 30 seconds
Did you email them to me?
Did you get the email?
Look.
Did you get the email? Did you get it? But I can step over here and I can bring them up. So the first story is FireEye and Microsoft execs and senators dissect mandatory breach disclosure in the wake of the SolarWinds attack. And the big push on the article is, how exactly can we move towards kind of a breach disclosure requirement for companies, and what the hell does that even look like? So in the article, they talked about SolarWinds, the new CEO. But one of the things I loved about the article is they said the CEO of SolarWinds, and they should say the new CEO of SolarWinds was there. And it was kind of cool because if you read between the lines of what he actually said, it was something like, we are embracing our responsibility to being an active participant in helping prevent these types of attacks in the future, which is corporate buzz speak for we're happy being a cautionary tale for an entire industry. So the whole point is, how the hell do we get to the point with this type of disclosure? Should disclosure be mandatory? And even if it is mandatory, what the hell does that look like? Like, who are you going to disclose to? Because it can't be the FBI in all these situations. So I guess I wanted to get everyone's opinions on what do you all think about the idea of this concept of mandatory disclosure when you're compromised. Kind of starts to look like GDPR a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, we already have a few industries that have mandatory disclosure requirements. Like, I think it's HIPAA and PCI. I know that there's also a regulation around United States universities with disclosures. I don't remember the exact requirement, but like there's already these things there, but there's very little incentive for companies to do it. So I think we have to start with, how do we get them to do it versus like the best way to do it? Because even if we have the best way to do it, like, there's no reason for them to.
Yeah, I agree. There's basically nothing but pain, right, on the other side of that. And I think it's very difficult to try to get an organization to say, hey, you know what? Going through that door is going to suck. They're going to beat you with sticks for literally hours. You're not going to get a lot of people being like, yeah, I want to go through that door, the responsible disclosure door. The other thing that I think is kind of missing, and I got another point that's weird in this entire conversation, but the other point that's interesting to me on this is, how many organizations out there from a percentage perspective do you think are instrumented to even know that they've been compromised in the first place?
More than some, less than most?
Oh, man. I honestly think it's only about 20% of the companies that are out there today are actually instrumented to actually detect a breach. And I'm kind of basing that off of a lot of our pen tests. So if we look at the pen tests that we do at BHIS, one, we're getting there's kind of a selection bias in BHIS. And a lot of the people come to our webcasts have gone through training with us. They know who we are. And we get these people that are already very much in the know. And of that, it's a smaller percentage of our total customers that are actually instrumented to detect a lot of the different techniques that we actually utilize, right? So you're looking at a smaller percentage and a smaller percentage as you work down. So I don't think the answer is we just need companies to do disclosure of breaches. I honestly don't think that they can detect if they're breached in the first place. So, Ralph, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you're a little bit less pessimistic than I am.
Yeah, no, actually, I agree with you. I think a lot of people can't detect. I mean, like, what is it, the OPM hack? They were like testing out a new security tool at the time, and they were like, oh, whoa, what is this? Do something. And that was like the whole thing, right? And so they're like testing it. I mean, and that is the government who should have a huge budget, right? And I think that's really what you're talking about too, right? It's not just the resources, it's also the budget.
But that's a good point. There's a number of breaches that have happened like that, right? Where you have the OPM attack, and I can't remember what product they were actually testing, but RSA, they detected their compromise because they were testing out and running NetWitness. And they ended up buying the company, like whenever they got compromised and all their tokens were completely stolen by the Chinese. And then you go to the water plant breach down in Tampa, and they detected that one because the guy's TeamViewer mouse started moving around. And that should be a terrifying point for all of us, where we're sitting around and we're like, wait a minute. So literally, it's completely blind luck that some of these companies detected some of these very terrifying breaches. That's not a good sign for the rest of the industry.
Yeah, I have a scary, feeling that if you made all these mandatory disclosures, they might not even go up. Like you might not even get any more disclosures because no one knows, right? Yep. It's like the same amount of disclosures. Just eventually, we found out, right? So
yeah. So I think that's weird that we're talking about disclosure, because I think that we're skipping some steps to get to disclosure, right? And I also, this gets into somewhat political territory, but is this even anything that the government can actually help through legislation for securing organizations? Because it seems like almost every time we have an audit and compliance standard, it becomes this race to the minimum, right? And people like that man will argue, and it's a valid point. He will argue that if you look at PCI, it has increased and improved security in that industry, handling credit cards. My question is, how much money do we put in, like trying to do that certification compliance? And then how much security do we get out of it? And would we be served better if all of a sudden the government stepped in and said, hey, everybody, we're all going to adhere to NIST 853? Would that actually help anything at all? I
mean, I don't know. I have mixed emotions, right? Like, I feel like there's a lot of companies that are just going to let security go because it's a cost, it's an insurance they decided not to pay into, right? Yeah. Like, we'll just see what happens. We're going to, just save a bunch of money and put that into our profit margin and so on and so forth, right? Like money. And I feel like there's other organizations that are spending more money than they probably should, or that, the bare minimum, they're doing more than that. They care about their organization, all this other stuff. So, I mean, and should the government come in and be like, not dictator, but like the person telling everyone, what they should be doing with their organization. And that's really the question. And, but the idea is that there should be like some kind of baseline, right? Even if that baseline is not that great, I mean, at least we could bring everyone hopefully up to that level, right? And especially with larger organizations, right, where you have a lot more consumers at risk. I think we need a certification and accreditation platform that's incredibly vague. It's like securing your environment. Step 1, use good passwords.
You mean NIST and SIS?
Yeah. Step 2, patch your stuff. Like, it's just like incredibly like it tells you what to do, but it's like, well, what's a good password? That's up to you. You've got to go find that answer on your own. I too have to find the answer on the top of mountains, and you get to do that now, Padawan. Cool. Just like really vague crap.
I was going to say.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say quickly, when they do make a rule, they're like, hey, 8-character password, that's good enough. And then you're like, it's kind of gotten a little, you need better. When we make that recommendation, they're like, no, it says 8 right here, though. So I'm following the guide. We're good, right? Yeah. So I don't know. It's like when you put it hard, when you put like the hard number, everyone falls back to it. Like, That's all I have to do.
Oh, dude, like I rant about this all the time. If you look at the NIST Green Book that came out in 1985, it said use an 8-character password because they were worried about the Russians breaking into computer systems over a 300 baud modem. And that was our fear. And a lot of the compliance standards, they started with the Green Book in 85, and then they continued with that 8-character password ever since then. And when we talk to organizations in a pen test, we're like, so 8 characters, why are you doing that? And they're like, well, our auditor said that that's what we should do for this compliance document. You're like, damn it. And if you try to get them to change, many times they're like, but the compliance guidance says this. Yeah. They don't even know where that crap comes from. It just continues to move forward. So here's the other thing that I think we need to talk about a little bit is I didn't see the whole testimony, but reading the article in SC Magazine, it looks like there was a lot of conversations about mandatory breach disclosure. Do you think that maybe there were some other things that they could have spent some more time talking about? Like, I don't know, possibly how in the hell do we start trying to secure critical infrastructure suppliers of software like SolarWinds? Because we look at critical infrastructure, and a lot of times like SCADA ICS systems, which we're going to talk about here in a couple of seconds, but SolarWinds is critical infrastructure. We've talked about that on the show because they're used literally everywhere. Microsoft is critical infrastructure. And, you know, we get down to FireEye or Cylance or any of these big security companies, they are critical infrastructure. And I don't think that we've had a good conversation on what the hell it looks like for us trying to protect organizations for these supply chain attacks. There was some brief conversation about how what happened at SolarWinds was something that could happen to literally dozens of other companies. And as near as I can tell, everybody there kind of nodded and was like, good point. Now let's move on. That seems not just like a tangential point. That seems like it's kind of should be center to this entire conversation. So whenever we talk about compliance standards for securing organizations and breach notification, that's one thing. But how the hell do you enforce code integrity and security standards on all of these different companies, from Oracle to Microsoft to Red Hat to SolarWinds to Cylance to FireEye? Because I think that that's a much larger issue that we're just not talking about as much as we should be.
Where do you draw the line on critical infrastructure? Because
good point.
Because with that comes funding. If you are identified as critical infrastructure, the government takes taxpayer money and starts funding you to do better security. So if you say every company that touches government networks is critical infrastructure because they're third parties, we're going to go broke really fast.
Well,
I mean, technically we're already broke, but
yeah, that's irrelevant and a whole nother.
That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But whenever you're looking at some of the standards that are out there, like somebody was just put in, Tricep talked about CMMC, which is Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And that's specifically dealing with like DoD systems. And the number of companies that actually fall under the umbrella of CMMC is literally, I think it's thousands of systems. So if you do anything like software development or you create widgets for the government, you have to have an actual cybersecurity maturity program. So literally DoD is trying to do something like this, but you know, you talk about bankrupt. I mean, all of these companies are going to have to charge more for their services and their products. And that's ultimately going to come back to us. And I'm sure it's not going to be cheap whenever it actually comes back to the taxpayers. So kind of, you know, trying to close this one out with the final question. Is it better to do audit and compliance, or is it better to actually have a punitive framework, kind of like GDPR is, where you have to notify whenever you're breached and there will be penalties levied against you when you are breached? So basically, is this something like a carrot, or is this something where a stick is more effective? And I know we have people that are listening from other countries, especially in Europe, but the GDPR model is pretty much a punitive model. It doesn't tell you how to secure your stuff, but it very clearly says if you screw up, I can't remember what the percentage is, but it's something like 6% gross of what a company makes within a year. And I know I'm getting that percentage wrong. That's a huge motivator. And you look at the number of companies in Europe that started panicking immediately, and they wanted pen tests and security assessments because they were more afraid of the fines if they got caught being breached than they were I'd ever seen them for certification, accreditation, and compliance. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Is it better to come up with punishing laws, or is it better to come up with compliance requirements?
I don't know. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I would say that it would be better to have a mixture of both. One where if you do your breach notification as soon as you know about it, which is arbitrary and contextual, but like if you do it as soon as you know about it, then there is no penalty. Trying to get them to notify as quickly as possible, and just getting it out there, like sort of like how CVEs happen, right? They're blank because someone wants to, reserve it for a second, and then having penalties go further the longer that the breach is not sent. Like, I don't know how you could prove that though, like because it would be all internal emails and alerts and stuff. So I don't know how to do it, but like make it so that it hurts more the longer you wait.
Or it hurts more the longer you go without knowing, because it can't just be like the waiting, right? Because if you have a company that was compromised for 6 months, there's a lot of negligence in that particular situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And then you get into SolarWinds. I mean, how the hell are you going to punish FireEye and Microsoft for SolarWinds being compromised? And then, it gets dicey quickly. But I do think if we try to get that mean time for detection, try to get that down as low as we can, I think the industry as a whole would be in a better place. So that's kind of crazy. So the other story I wanted to talk about is this article. Let me share out my screen again. This article where Dragos basically went out and identified they said it's a sandworm adjacent group, but it's actually two separate groups that they were able to identify that are basically trying to attack critical infrastructure. And the gist of the article is Dragos identified that there's two separate groups in the Russians. One group will get initial compromise, and then they'll hand access over to a second group, and then they know what to do once they actually have that access in the environment. And I'm bringing this up for a couple of reasons. One, if you look at the actual attacks that Dragos was actually going through, it was basically the same crap that we see again and again: spear phishing and exploiting patches and services that aren't applied, patches that aren't applied and weak services that are misconfigured. So we're seeing that again and again, and it's the same stuff, The other thing that I think is interesting is Dragos came out and they started kind of identifying the subgroup and how they actually hand things over. And then they basically, the author at Wired tried to go to other security organizations and say, hey, are you seeing this exact same thing? And basically their answer was no. And I had some people kind of talking to me on back channels. They basically were like, well, this is just kind of Dragos trying to get news stories and get them out there. And, it's more publicity than it is actually anything that's useful. And my first take on that is, yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, I still don't understand in this industry. We're talking about how Twitter is sometimes like this dumpster fire. But whenever something like this happens, right? Like Dragos comes out and they got this report on this group and what they do and how they do it. And then people are like, ha, it's marketing. It's like, congratulations. You literally pointed out the most single obvious thing out there. Now, the question is, does it actually provide value? And I actually do think it provides value, kind of talking about how two separate groups do a handoff, one that's focused on initial compromise into systems, and then another one that actually does the post-exploitation activities as well. But look, is this bad? I mean, just to boil it down to a real simple question for you two, like, seriously, Dragos coming out with a report on what they're seeing. It's marketing, absolutely. Rob Lee and his team are absolutely doing marketing. That's how they get freaking business. But is that necessarily a bad thing? Because I noticed Mandiant gets beat up for it whenever they release their reports. Verizon gets beat up for it whenever they release their reports. You see all these different firms that are constantly talking about what they're discovering. Hell, BHIS, this is freaking marketing. If you're watching this, congratulations. You got it. Our marketing trap. Excellent. Is it time that we kind of let that crap go and stop trying to point these things out as like blatant marketing attempts? Because there's still value in this, right?
Yes. I agree.
There's still value in this particular one, or just generally marketing?
This one, this call right now.
Let's talk about this one specifically.
I think there's a lot of value in this one, but I might be biased.
What value do you see in this? Just to call you out, what value is there?
So I look at it in two separate. One, it's a jobs program for pen testers.
That's right.
Like, the more these stories go out, I'm not even joking, right? Like, Rob is going to get a Christmas card from me, because whenever these stories go out, it isn't just marketing for Dragos, it's marketing for the entire industry. And one of the things I think that these stories do, if there's nothing technical that comes out of it that says specifically this is what your organization has to watch for, it keeps the awareness on security. It keeps the awareness on the attack. It keeps the awareness on the same stupid garbage like spear phishing attacks that work. One of the stories that I nixed today, they were talking about spear phishing attacks against 10,000 people at DHL and FedEx because they want those sweet email addresses to do additional attacks from real FedEx emails. I didn't even do that because that's crap. That happens all the time, right? But I think that the first thing that I would say that there's actual value from this is keeping pressure on the news cycle that actually securing the power grid is an important part of what we need to do in security. So that would be the first thing, right? That would be absolutely the first. The other thing is, once again, the exact same type of attacks that we have been seeing. And I know, it's like ransomware. I don't even like talking about ransomware on this show because it was literally turning into the ransomware hour. But what it does is I also think it keeps focus on, no. It isn't the exploit du jour that you need to worry about. It's the standard fundamentals that you need to be worrying about as well. So I look at it as two separate things. One, keeping the overall general awareness on security. And then the other thing is keeping awareness on some of these techniques that you would consider to be boring in this industry as a whole. So that's my take. But that's my opinion on that. It's nothing quantitative saying, here's a new exploit and this is neat. We don't have any of that here.
So as an individual contributor, one of the things I always hated being in IT in general was my manager seeing a news story and going, "Oh, we got to do this right now." And I will step back and say, as I've grown older, I've started to understand exactly the value there in exactly what you're talking about, right? So if for one instance, like, if anyone who's listening to this right now happens to be part and parcel of the power grid in any state or country, and they see this and be like, "Oh, I hadn't thought that it was a target," for whatever reason, like they might be new, they might just be, or whatever, like they might be the first time being in charge of, people at IT, right? Like they might be someone who has just worked the line for 20 years and finally doing the IT side of things, right? Whatever the case, if one person sees this just because we mentioned it on the show and they go, "Hey, we need to tighten the ship a little bit," and brings it up, it's got value, right? Yeah. And it might not be for you. It might just be something you've heard 500,000 times, but it's going to reach, as long as it gets out there, it's going to reach the right people eventually. Hopefully.
Well, but I think that like people like us and people that have been doing this for a long time, right? I think we get jaded, and I think it becomes too easy whenever these news stories come out. Because you're right, I would say that there's nothing really new in this story, right? There's nothing earth-shattering in this story. There's nothing that fundamentally changes the game in this story. And I know I'm going to get people from Dragos like emailing me because like Dragos is like a cult. People love working there, right? And I'm going to have the posse after me. But, I think that we get jaded in the industry as a whole where we read something like this and it's like, no, nothing new. They use Mimikatz. Is that new? No, that's been used forever. That's not interesting at all. And it's like crash override. We talked about that back when Kiev and Ukraine.
Wait. You could actually use Mimikatz on a OT system. Wait, like I want to meet the person who can get that done.
Yeah. But you go through this, right? And then at the end we get jaded, and it doesn't feed our need to get new technical tidbits, right? So I think that it's easy for us to fall into that kind of trap where we're always looking for that new hotness, because it's kind of like that drip. It's like, where's the new technique that we're looking for? Because Mimikatz, as awesome as it is, it's been around forever. So
I always think it's funny though when you are looking for new techniques, or like you are looking for that, like the drip you're talking about. A lot of times I end up finding it in the minute details and not in the whole, like, you know, the big piece, right? I find like the little drip and like, oh, they did, oh, like it's like the little pieces of the puzzle that usually do when you're like putting these things together, like putting this attack together, that I find the most value out of, as opposed to just like the you know, the big title, right? You know, what exactly they broke into, right? So it's always the tidbits that get me going, right?
Well, and sometimes the things that aren't said, like I remember when Duke came out, and Duke was out trying to steal code signing certificates.
Dooku?
Dooku or Duke? I've heard it's pronounced Duke.
Okay, interesting.
But I always pronounced it Dooku as well, but whatever. When that came out,
learn something new every day.
You read the entire thing all the way through, and it was really cool. It timed itself out. It went after code signing certificates, and then it like used a Microsoft code signing certificate. And people were like, well, this just shows that they brute forced it. And in my head, I'm like, that's not how that works. Like, that's not, math doesn't work that way.
Any of this works.
It's not, but it's just like this weird little thing. And then talked about the C2 servers were the specific version of Red Hat SSH. And it's like, no, they have a 0 day for that version of SSH. Sometimes it's the things they don't say that kind of pique your interest. So
that's why I like going to conferences and talks, because like no matter if I know the content or not, let's say they're talking about like how to dump passwords on Windows. Like I will go to that talk every single time.
Every damn time, right?
Because there's going to be some little thing that I had no idea about, and I'll wait through a 2-hour talk to find that little thing, and it'll happen. Like 9 times out of 10, there will be some other trick that I had not even heard about, and that's and it's a whole different topic. But that's why I don't really show up in like LobbyCon. I'm always in the talks.
Well, and the other thing that's really cool is if you can talk to that presenter after the talk.
Oh yeah,
there's a bunch of stuff that they didn't put in their talk for a variety of reasons. Like, you know, they'll pull up their computer, they'll flip it open, and they'll be like, I don't know what the hell this is. I was going to talk about this, but I don't even know what that is. And they get like 3-4 people around it, and eventually you find like a new vulnerability or a new attack path or something like that. And that's one of the things I miss about SANS. Is that was always like, you have a room of 100 people and you're presenting on something. You almost always had someone that would pull you up and be like, hey, come here. Let me show you something. And they're like, here's a VPN 0 day my team found. And you're like, thank you. It was just so cool whenever that happened.
Man,
go ahead.
Sorry, but what kind of confidence do you have to come up to a trainer? Like I'm cool with coming up to a speaker who's there to like answer questions and like stuff, but like coming up to a trainer, I don't know if I would have the confidence to go, hey, you missed something, or like, hey, you should do that. Like that's,
dude. I think that people look at me as just a bumbling idiot whenever I'm presenting, so they feel relatively confident coming up to me. They're like, okay, you seem to know what you're doing, but you're not that bright. So let me show you. And it's worked to my advantage for years, right?
Nice.
You seem very approachable.
He seems dumb. That gives him the approachability factor that we're looking for. The other thing that I wanted people to kind of take away from this, and they don't talk about it much in this article, is you see that the Russians have twice attacked Ukraine in a major way from a power grid perspective. And the other reason why I wanted to talk about this article is watch the news for Ukraine. And the reason why is Ukraine is the training ground for what Russia is planning on doing and the type of access that they're trying to get. So if you want to know what are they going to do against the United States, be watching the news for what Russia's doing in Ukraine, and then you're going to be able to get a much better understanding of their techniques, because they don't give a rip. They'll like go into Ukraine, they'll kill the power grid in Kiev, they mess with them all the time. It's like their little brother, giving them nuggies and all those things. But at the end of the day, that's just what they're trying to do to other countries.
Ukraine is Russia's lab.
Yeah, Ukraine is Russia's lab. I
just watched the HBO documentary that said that it was pretty good, because I'd never seen
Sandworm one.
Wow.
It's called Sandworm, right?
The Perfect Weapon, I believe, is the title.
Oh, Perfect Weapon. So no, yeah, go ahead.
The biggest power grid outage that I've ever seen due to cyber attack was the Brazil one. Like, I think that was like 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Like, where Brazilian hackers attacked the Brazilian power grid and took it down for like weeks. Like all of Brazil was down for weeks.
Yeah,
and
don't so power outages all the time anyways, though. I don't know. Yeah. I know like over in South America there's a lot of it's not super reliable.
Yeah. So also God's hack of the Texas was pretty solid last week. That was like God's watching the Russians. He's like,
so Russia,
hey,
Russia
Jesus,
is God's
hold my beer. We got this.
So I heard a joke yesterday. It was what's the difference between Texas Electric Company and a dumpster fire?
Oh my God! What?
A dumpster fire provides reliable heat and light.
Oh God!
I'm not sure I would say that anywhere near Texas.
I want you to understand we're laughing with you and not.
Yeah, I felt
your rage is our
thing.
rage, right?
Yes.
Your rage is our rage. So, like I said, not a lot of stories this week. And I'm sure I could have dug a little bit deeper into finding some new exploit. Oh, you guys were talking.
Can I go on that last minute one?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the one we were talking about just before the show?
Oh yeah, I just posted the link.
The client one.
Yeah, the client. Yeah, so it's a unauthorized remote code execution in VMware vCenter, and they said client, right? So I have a bit of experience with VMware and vCenter, especially, right? And
no,
I know, I love it. Anyways, so if you, the exploit is kind of interesting because the way that it works is that vCenter has a web interface and they've depreciated out the vSphere client, so there isn't
there's no client.
There's no client, right? It's just HTML5, and in fact, they've been publicly pretty vocal about the fact that they're not going to have a client in the future. It'll all be web-based from this point. And they dumped Flash, which was another thing. Anyways, so the exploit, yeah, right. So the exploit is actually the first piece of it is that they're using VMware Realize operations, which is like an operations management for the vRealize suite. It's a plugin that's built inside of vCenter. That plugin, for whatever reason, one of the services on it does not require authentication to interact with that over the web interface, right? So, and the functions inside of that plugin are probably pretty wide, but one of them is the ability to upload a file. Particularly, it's to uploading OVAs, which would be, an image of a virtual machine. So the way the vulnerability pretty much goes down is an unpatched system. You are able to upload a file, so they go ahead and upload Java. They end up uploading a jar file.
Again? Yeah. Jar files again?
Yeah, JSP.
Awesome.
Excuse me.
I mean, it's still Java.
Yeah, it is. So it's a JSP file, and they upload that. And since it's Java, the gift that gives, it works on both Windows and in Linux. Though, arguably speaking, most deployments nowadays use the VCSA, which is the VMware server appliance, which actually runs in Linux. So most of these will be a Linux attack, but it is a unauthenticated remote code execution. And it's pretty simple, so definitely go out there and patch it. The link I posted.
Yay!
Yeah.
So if you pen test right now, go.
That's every pen tester. Now, if you guys been on a pen test where you're like, please, God, could you please give me a new exploit during this pen test? I need to take a local privilege escalation on Windows. and then you go on Reddit or on Twitter or wherever, and you're like, thank you.
For anytime you find vCenter on an engagement and you can get access, that's gold. I mean, that is better than domain admin for sure, without a doubt. Because if you get a high-level user in vCenter, you have the keys to the castle, dude. It is every virtual machine inside of there. And some of those environments are huge, right? I mean, you have access to machines. They might not even be on the internet. They might not be on a network, right? Like they're just isolated. But because you have vCenter access, you now access to that system, right? So
I was on a test where they had, we got vCenter access, and they had this like list of appliances they were doing like a bake-off with, and they're all defaultly configured, but they were all joined to the domain and all this stuff like on their network, and like so, I just opened up the console on each one, and like all the domain admins were logged into all of them because they were trying them out. They're testing them out, and yeah, it was great. But I'll do you one better. I was on a pen test when MS 14068 came out.
The day?
Like the day?
The week that it came out, and no one that I could talk to, and I talked to as many people that had researched that as I could, would give me a POC or even talk to me about how a POC worked. So it came out. It's for those who don't know, 14068 was standard user in a domain to domain admin by asking for a Kerberos ticket. Like it was that simple. And no one I talked to, I'm like, hey, I'm on a test right now. Can I try the POC? I know you have a POC. Can I try it today? Like I just need it today.
You don't want the barrel.
and I'm like, I will give you my firstborn, like whatever. I need to get. And everyone's like, nope. It's all under NDA. We're trying to get this thing patched as soon as possible and stuff like
gosh.
it. Like it was like all hands on deck when this came out, right? Like everyone was like, we need to patch our domain controllers today. Microsoft was today, and like it was bad.
I have one where what was the other vulnerability that came out recently? The same thing. What was the name of that one? I can't remember. It's the same process, right? You could change, right, the system account on a domain controller, unauthenticated.
Oh, zero logon.
Yeah, zero logon. So zero logon had come out. I'm on an engagement, and the proof of concept literally that day had been released, and I'm on, and like I'm looking for access, and I did like a whole day of research testing it, because everyone was like, on Twitter, it's like, oh, don't do this. Like you can,
because it'll break a lot of stuff.
Break a lot of stuff, right? So I tested out the whole day, ended up running it, immediate full access, and then continued on in the engagement. So,
ooh, you have bigger cojones than I do. Like, like that exploit is just.
But let's be honest. If we would do that, we would talk to the customer and be like, "Yo, can I try this?" And I love the customer. They're like, "Yeah,
no." Customer was on board. Yeah, they were on board. I tested it out. They did not know that I did it because this was essentially a red team. So their security team had no idea that I had executed this, even though on Twitter, I saw so many people say you will destroy the domain. There are some caveats, but you can execute it, right? So
see, that's where I'm. Dear customer, this is the enter key. Going to press it.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, but it was pretty much a zero, like an immediate domain admin, right?
Immediate day.
Immediate day.
One of these days, we should put together. I was talking with a reporter, and we were talking about something, and led into she was looking for one thing, and I was like, "Holy crap, this could be something else." She wanted to do an article on forever days because she's like, it seems like a lot of people in the industry have these 0 days that just don't ever seem to get patched, and they just keep using them. And I wanted to talk about, like link local multicast name resolution and group policy preference files. Like there's like even the Java applet attack. Like there were these attacks that we used in the industry for like 5-7 years before they were ever taken care of, and kind of talk about those types of vulnerabilities, not just like something that drops, but like the thing that you get in and test, like curb roasting would be a forever day, right?
Yeah.
As soon as you get in, you're like, shit, that worked again. It's nothing new, right?
So what is your current favorite forever day?
The one that I'm really, really, really excited about is the OAuth attacks.
Yeah, those were good.
And there's some issues around that. Like you have to actually now for Microsoft or Google, you have to register as a company and you have to kind of prove that you're legit. But damn, we're right back to one-click compromise, right? So if you go through that effort, for people that don't know, if you have a website, like let's say like Dropbox or GoToWebinar or DocuSign, they always have these little buttons that say sign in with Google, sign in with your Office 365 account. And you can literally create a company, create a page, and as soon as you click on that, it pops up and it says, hey, this particular app needs to have access to your email, needs to have access to your chat and your files. You're like, okay, whatevs. And it totally gives you the attacker the access to their email, to their files, and to everything, and we're right back to one-click compromise. So that is something. MDSec has some great tools that they've released on it. We're going to be releasing another tool on it here shortly. But I think that that's a forever day. I think that that's going to be one of those 0 days because it's not something that you just go through and patch to fix how OAuth works. You're not going to see Microsoft and Google say, well, maybe us being the single sign-on authority for all these services is a bad idea. We're going to roll that crap back. That's not happening. So I think that one's going to stick with us for a good long time. So that's mine. Ralph, yours?
Oh, password spraying. It's been like the thing for a while.
20 years now.
Dude, I mean, I don't know. It just feels like it never dies, right? And it still works. It's still usually part of the chain in some way. It usually gets you going. I mean, there's other ones too, and it really depends on where you're at in this compromise, right? You post, or pre-exploit, like where are you at? But that one has done so much for me in all different levels, right? Exploit, before everything. So, and that initial access, that initial account is really all you need to really make it happen. So, yeah.
And it's just fun. Rob, yours.
Windows deployment services. Any like WDS is my go-to. I love it. Like all you do is say, "Hey, WDS, give me all your configs for deploying Windows boxes," and it says, "Sure, no problem." And you just get creds, and it says, "Okay, here's your creds, and like here's how it joins a new computer to a domain." And so many times that's elevated or at least high, a high level of privileged user, and you automatically get a user on the domain. Like, and those services have to be unauthenticated. Like they literally have to be so that a new computer without authentication can go give me how I can set myself up. So it has to be that way. And so when you get the credentials, you have logon credentials for the domain, and you're there. Like WDS, it's very little talked about anywhere. Like there's a Metasploit module from I think 2015. And there's a root dog or root dance blog post about it, and that's it. Like no one else talks about it. I think Dave Kennedy talked about it one time at DEF CON, and like no one else talks about WDS anymore. And I don't know. I love it.
I could have sworn you were going to say SolarWinds.
So that's the gift that keeps on giving. That's not my favorite zero. That's not my forever day.
Forever day.
So,
I gotcha.
So if I want to, go ahead.
So I was going to say this kind of goes into another thing like obscure days, right? So that's one that you're like, why aren't more people doing this? The other one that I just am blown away that I don't see more people talking about is the feature in Mail Sniper. That once you get access to a system and you can get access to their Exchange environment, you can use Mail Sniper and you can search through the entire global address list and say, hey, is there anybody here that's sharing their entire email account out with everybody? And then you can access all of their emails. Like, I don't see why we don't, people that one more too.
Oh, that one brings up another good point, which has come up recently, is for this one, I feel like will be a forever day. App passwords, right? They're the new backdoor, right, inside of cloud applications. So you get access to them, and you know that you're on a time limit because of maybe losing access. You add an app password, and you can get access to those things, including what you just talked about, which was EWS, which is considered a depreciated service. But you can use an app password and bypass the two-factor involved in that. So that's another fun one too, especially with cloud.
And I think Cred Sniper did that with Google. So once it gained access, it immediately created a rule to filter out any security emails. Like, hey, this new device just logged in. That's gone. There's a rule that blows that away. And then it creates that app password automatically for you. So,
oh yeah.
But no, this is another show. I think it's time.
It is.
My wife is calling me, and we got to get going. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Ralph, Brian, thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
See you later, Ron. We're going to just read me wrong.